In the summer of 2012, I took a job as an expedition canoe guide on the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota, Quetico, southern Ontario. These are massive wilderness areas of lakes and lands. I was working for the Boy Scouts and we were based in Moose Lake on the US side. My job was to facilitate a fun and safe multi-day trip, anywhere from 7 to 12 days out. Most of that summer was typical, but the one expedition in particular that still haunts me as a result of what happened to us over the course of a few days. Here's the account in full. My crew was on the younger side. There were 9 of us total, the maximum allowed in a group per our permit. There were 6 scouts and 2 adult supervisors, and myself. They had wanted to do a 200-miler but didn't have the physical ability, so we had to amend our route. They were bummed out, so I decided to take them to a waterfall called Eddy Falls. It's pretty flat up there, so there's a waterfall that is somewhat rare, but that decision would end up putting us in the path of something. We visited the falls and camped near it. That evening, I had the boys working on a camp setup while the advisors worked on fire for dinner. I was collecting firewood in a big tangle of downed trees, brush, and bramble. I could faintly hear the falls off to my left when out of nowhere, I hear the most unearthly scream or roar that I've ever heard. It stopped me dead in my tracks and I was completely frozen. The second scream was closer, and the third even closer than that. I couldn't see anything due to the thickness of the brush, but whatever this was coming directly at me. By the fourth scream, I could feel it in my chest. I got nauseous and involuntarily barked at it. I've never before or since heard that sound come out of my body. The fifth scream almost physically hurt, but it snapped me back to reality and I ran back to our camp. My crew had heard it too, but what am I to tell them? I claimed it was a boar, but there's no boar up there, and the advisors knew I was lying, but didn't call my bluff. After dinner, they went to their tents and I retired to my hammock that was about 50 yards from camp. As a rule, I always set my hammock up at my head height, so it's about 6 feet up. I would use a tarp over my body and head to keep the morning dew off and the morning mosquitoes at bay. But the tarp wasn't strung up. That's important. It was just loosely over me. It must have been around 3 to 4 a.m. when I was awakened by what sounded to me like a woman sobbing. Not an outright cry, but a sob. At the same time, I'm hearing something walking through the thick brush down past my feet. So I listen, totally still and quiet as it crosses into camp. I could hear the change from brush to granite rock, but could still hear its heavy footfalls as it walked right through the camp and on towards me. At this point, the tarp is still over my head, so I can't see a thing, and I don't know what to do. In no time, it was standing right next to me. I could hear the breathing, loud and congested sounding. I could smell the musk. I could feel its enormous presence only inches from my body, just standing there. Time to make a decision. I suddenly threw the tarp off my head, and as I did this, my left hand touched this thing in the chest. It was dark, but I could make out briefly a very large upright figure. The hair on it was long and coarse. The frame itself was impressive, like bodybuilder status, pectoral, is what I ended up touching. It all happened in a second, and as soon as my hand made contact, it bolted back into the brush with immense speed for such thick debris. By the time I got my headlamp on, it was gone. My crew had slept through all of it, so I read until the sun came up and decided not to mention it to anyone. The next day, we moved on to a few miles towards a base camp and camped on a small island. Campsites on the US side are designed by a fire pit and a grumper, which is a fiberglass toilet over a deep hole. When we were arriving, it was evening. One of the adult supervisors needed to visit the grumper, so we walked towards it. About 2 minutes later, we heard him yelling and he came running back to the camp, still pulling up his pants, and said he'd just seen a gorilla run right in front of him. I asked if it was maybe a bear, and he said absolutely not. That he'd hunted bear for years and that was no bear. It was a monkey, and it was about 9 feet tall. At this height estimate, I'm imagining being back in my hammock. If I touched the chest and it was about 6 feet off the ground, that puts the head close to 9 feet up. Was it stalking us? Was there more than one? All the boys are now scared. It's time to mitigate. I suggest a night paddle. No one's sleeping anymore anyway, so we pack up and set out around 8 p.m. and paddled by headlamp for several miles. My plan was to get back onto Moose Lake and camp very near to base so we could be the first crew off the water the following day. Moose Lake is connected to the Newfoundland Lake, and by a small pinch, and a channel of water that's not very deep or wide. There's dark woods on both sides. We were right in the middle of the pinch when a rock the size of a baseball came flying out of the woods on the right side and narrowly missing the bow of the canoe I was steering. There's no cliff there. This thing was forcefully thrown at us from the tree line. At this, we paddled like hell. We paddled to the center of Moose Lake, tied all 3 canoes together, and we sat out there all night. With the sunrise, we paddled back to base camp and ended our expedition. No one wanted to talk about what had happened, and I was okay with that. They left for Oklahoma the next day. After they left, I went to work a shift in the canoe yard, helping crews offload. My buddy Justin just got back from a trip in the same area we'd been in. He was in Bear Loop. As I was helping him put the boat on the rack, I noticed that he had a distant look, almost 1,000-yard stare. I asked him how his trip went. He said it was all good until they hit Knife Lake, Newfound Lake. He said that they were being messed with for a few nights on Knife, and then had a rock thrown at them in the Newfound Pinch. Sure enough, for a solid 2 weeks after that, crews kept coming back from that area with very similar stories. One night, there was a crowd of us guides in the staff lodge swapping trail stories, and these encounters came up one after another. Screams, rocks, sightings of apes. Then from the back corner of the room I hear a chuckle. It's one of the old veteran guides who'd been there for over a decade. All he said was, "It's about time somebody else seen one." I asked how long he'd known that they were there for. He said he's been encountering them for around 10 years now. Then he said, "They talked to me." This shocked me. "Like a language?" I asked. "No, they communicate telepathically. The less you acknowledge them, the less they'll bother you. But they can read you, and they like it when you're afraid. It's a game to them." What happened out there is still a big question in my mind. I've always been open to the idea of Sasquatch. Their existence was never a huge stretch for me. But what really sticks with me is the way that veteran guide spoke of their intelligence and the parapsychological abilities. That they can read human emotions as clear as pages in a book. That they know our species better than we know ourselves. So I'm a 24-year-old male. I've lived on my own for about 2 years now. I have a very small bungalow I'm able to pretty comfortably afford. In this bungalow, I have an attic area. At a guess, I'd say it's about 5 by 5 meters in size. And you can only really stand in there at the very center. Anyways, I worked a night shift at a factory. I basically just sit on my phone all night. So I would usually get in around 8 a.m. I was coming home last Thursday during a heavy storm. Got into the house and just went straight to sleep. When I woke up, I went on my phone and saw that I was so tired that I didn't check my notifications. I have a Ring camera outside my door, which shows me anyone that would have come into my room. I saw that it had been tripped around 7:42 a.m. I had gotten home between 8:10 and 8:15. I checked the video and saw that it was a man. He was pressed right up to the door and was fumbling around with the handle. He did this for about 10 seconds until he spotted the camera. Once he did so, he very quickly scuttled away. This unsettled me, but it didn't entirely creep me out or anything. I got up to go make some food and discovered something in my kitchen. My back door was now open. I, of course, instantly began having thoughts of a home intruder, but I slowly convinced myself that I had left it open. The rest of the day consisted of this. just noticing small things that didn't seem right and scaring myself. All up until a point. I leave for the shift at 10 p.m. and I was watching some TV around 9 o'clock-ish. I spotted something that made my heart leap into my throat. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see it. The entrance to my attic was slowly being slid open. I can vividly remember that I began questioning my sanity. Surely I was just hallucinating or something. I looked over at it and I absolutely saw something that made me so much more scared. I saw fingers wrap around the hatch and begin moving it more. I didn't know what to do. I could feel the panic beginning to really get to me. And I wasn't sure if I leave the house and call the police or if I should try and yell at whoever was up there. I chose a mixture of both. I began to dial 999 and ran to my bedroom where I could lock the door. As soon as I began running, I heard the hatch get almost tore off with the speed that they moved it. And I arrived at my bedroom door. I looked down the corridor and watched for a second. Seeing only a little slice of the blackness up in my attic, I saw the human hands still holding onto the sides of the ceiling. I yelled, "Whoever is up there, I'm calling the police, and I have a gun. If you take a step out of there, I will fucking shoot you." The adrenaline was really making my hands and voice shake, but I tried sounding as tough as I could. Then I saw something that I truly do not think I will ever forget. The hand slipped back into the dark, and then he dropped down. I slammed my door shut and locked it as quickly as I could. The call went through and I was able to get on the line with the police, and they dispatched officers to my house. I told them I didn't know if the man was armed or not, and the dispatcher told me to stay on the line. I heard the man walking up to my door and rattling the door handle. He also seemingly went through my cupboards in my kitchen as I heard a lot of commotion in there. Truth be told, I don't know why he stayed. I would have just left the house, but he stayed right up until the police came and arrested him. Apparently he was a homeless man and was armed with a knife from my kitchen and had recently been seen in the area trying to get into other people's houses. And truth be told, I'm very frightened to sleep still. I now sleep with my bedroom door locked and all my windows closed. I also sleep with a knife under my pillow. I know this is unlikely to ever happen again, but I just cannot forget the way he dropped down from my attic. So that's the story of the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I made this account to tell it, because I feel like if I write it down like this, it will feel less like a real thing, and more, just like a story. If something happens to me, it was the guy in room 235. This happened an hour ago. I work at an upscale hotel in one of my state's most affluent suburbs. Like most hotels, we're struggling during the virus. Our rates have been slashed in half to get guests through the door. Our clientele has shifted from upper crusty business people to a mixed bag of characters. It's mostly been fine, with a couple of notable exceptions earlier on in the pandemic. Cut to tonight. I'm working overnight alone 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. About 3 hours into my shift, I get a call from room 235. He has a strange voice. It's quiet, raspy, and maybe has an accent. He tells me that he can't figure out how to work the TV remote to his TV. I assume maybe the batteries have died, but he insists that the remote works just fine. He doesn't understand how to operate the volume button. I find this strange. I've worked in the hotel for 5 years and not once encountered someone who didn't understand the TV remote. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt. The volume button is like the Guitar Hero strum switch. You have to press a single switch up or down to navigate. Also, working in customer service, you come to realize that people are much, much dumber than you want to believe they are. Since I'm alone at the hotel and not technically supposed to leave the front desk, I tell him that if he comes down to the lobby, I will gladly show him how it works. This upsets him. He grunts and starts complaining that our customer service is terrible. What kind of hotel wouldn't have the attendant come to the room for something like this? I give in. He's only 1 floor up, and it can't possibly take long to show someone how to change the volume on a remote. Everyone is checked in, it's just not worth the argument or the bad review later. So I tell him I'll be up in a moment. I knock on the door and do the customary call out, "Guest services." A can faintly hear him talking to someone. It's murmured, and I can't pick up any distinguishable words. At first, it felt like he was instructing someone else to get the door, and I anticipated it opening up shortly thereafter. The talking went on for so long that I wondered if maybe the people in the room hadn't heard me. I was debating knocking again when the deadbolt slowly unlatched. Normally when I go to a room, the guest opens up the door wide and stands to the side to let me in, or at the very least opens the door enough so that I can fully see them, and they can fully see me. Not 235. He barely cracks the door. It's open maybe an inch. Even weirder, all the room lights are off. It's entirely dark except for the faint glow of his TV, which is on, but the volume turned all the way down. His voice sounds exactly like it had on the phone, raspy and whispered. He's standing behind the door so I can't see him at all. Completely disembodied, he instructs me, "Come on in, sweetie." I say nothing, and I don't move. I guess now is the part where I tell you I'm smallish, a 5-foot-tall woman with a baby face in my mid-20s. "Come on, come inside." He sounds more edgy, more insistent this time. It feels so obviously like a trap that if it wasn't absurdly on edge, I would have been insulted. How naive does he think I am? I pushed the door open but remained as much in the hallway as possible. I also took the opportunity to reach for the light switch just inside the door. The room lights up and I finally get a look at him. He's at least 60, white-haired and slim, but with a little gut. He's shirtless, wearing pants, but his belt is undone and the ends are flopping down. I'm not entirely sure because I try not to look, but I believe his pants are also unzipped. He appears to be completely alone in the room. The only piece of luggage is a small black duffel bag. I quickly try to explain the volume switch from where I'm standing awkwardly in the doorway, but he isn't comprehending it, or at least, he's acting like he isn't. I ask him to give the remote to me so I could show him, but he backs further up into the room. "You know, it'll be easier for both of us if you just come inside," he gruffly tells me. For a brief moment, I think I see his eyes glimmer. Update: I made it through the night. My boss wasn't very concerned and felt badly. He apologized if he ever had to make me feel like I had to go into guest rooms alone while on the property, and made it clear he does not want us to do that anymore. For the record, no one has made me feel like I have to do that. All of the front desk staff do it all the time. I usually don't unless it's one of our regulars who just needs a new roll of toilet paper or something. I did in this instance because it seemed like it would be quick, and while he sounded weird on the phone, and I hated his voice, I didn't expect to go as it did. You encounter a lot of weird people working in lodging. Usually, I feel like I can tell the benign from the malignant. Obviously, it was a bad call on my part, and I was wrong in this case. I've learned my lesson. As for not calling the police or my boss right then and there, I feel like I was potentially going to be in harm's way while standing in the doorway, and he was actively being a creep. But when I got downstairs to my lockable office with my security cameras, I just remained anxious and on high alert. I had decided if he called again, I obviously wasn't going up there, and if he came to the desk, I would have called 911 on my cell just in case. We're 2 minutes from the police station, and there's usually a patrol car hanging out in our shopping center. They show up quickly anytime I've had to call. I also like to think critically before I call the police for any reason. I've called them on someone for being very similar, as in weird, but just in a slightly different way, and was told that unfortunately, he technically hadn't done anything, and to call back if he does. I don't really believe it would have gotten me anywhere. I didn't call my GM because he lives 45 minutes away, and I'm not really sure what he would have done. Even if he offered to wake up and drive the 45 minutes to the hotel to replace me on my shift, I would have refused because I need the money. Thanks for everyone's concern and for checking in on me throughout my shift. I wrote the post because I couldn't believe what had just happened and I needed to share it with someone, even anonymous people who don't know my location, to feel less alone during the process. I also eventually got in touch with my girlfriend, so I had a real person with my real address keeping tabs on me as well. A few years ago, I was working at a pizza chain in my hometown as a driver. I was 27 but made darn good money delivering. I had worked at a few other places, both local and chain, in the years before, and still work as a dasher on occasion even after this happened. Now I choose to deliver in much safer areas for this reason. I got luckier than I could ever imagine. One night, I was working and had a double. Both orders were cash. I had $12 left in my bank, and the first order went smoothly. The guy gave me $50 for a $35 order, so I was excited about the nice tip. I drove to the second delivery. It was at an apartment complex with multiple buildings. I had delivered there before. The sun was about to set, but it was still very light out. The chain I worked at had us drive company cars with the logo on it, all white sedans. This is important for later. I grab the order and go out to the door to the apartment building. A young guy comes out, and a much bigger, older guy was outside smoking a cigarette. The big guy went inside as the smaller guy came out. He looked around nervously and asked how much he owed me. The way he was looking around just made me very nervous. Hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I told him the amount, and he said that wasn't what he was told on the phone. Again, something is very wrong here. I felt someone else walk out behind me from the door, and just as the first young guy looked around down the parking lot, craning his neck as if he was looking for someone, again, I told him the amount and broke down the order for him, trying to keep calm. Then, the first guy held a gun to my right temple. I also felt a poke on the back of my spine. 2 gunmen. I couldn't speak. Words wouldn't form no matter how hard I tried.
Give me your money and your keys. Now.
The first guy growled. I fumbled immediately for the keys. I gave him my money and didn't realize the 50 was mixed in. I gave him the keys, trying my best to remain calm. Then another guy came up on my left. He looked to be around the same age as the first kid. The one behind me I still hadn't seen yet. The big-haired kid grabbed the pizza bag and ran off and hid. The first kid searched the company car. Luckily, I had left my wallet in my personal car, and I saw him grab my cell phone. That's when the panic began to set in. I had pictures on that phone that I hadn't backed up of my 5-year-old son, who is my absolute world. Please, please don't take that. I have pictures of my son who died on there. It's all I have of him, please. I lied. My son is very much alive, and the kid behind me spoke softly.
Trust me, just listen to him. You'll get it back undamaged. I don't want to be here either.
I could tell he'd been crying by the way his voice sounded. A car pulled in, and the 3 boys took off from the other end of the complex in full sprint. Before the one behind me took off, he accidentally dropped the gun right in front of me. It was a standard issue 9mm, silver and black, with the safety off. It looked completely real to me. He picked it back up and ran with the others. The car that pulled in saw me. It was a woman and her kid. Panic set in as I realized they could easily come back and do way worse to me. I collapsed. They had taken my company car keys, $72, the pizza, and my phone. The woman ran up to me and asked if I was alright. She took me into her apartment in the next building over and locked the door. I was shaking so hard I couldn't even hold her phone to call 911 as she set her kid down. Her boyfriend, I assume, helped me call. I spoke to the operator and told her everything. I'm colorblind, unfortunately, and these guys were obviously wearing all black and white clothes, thank God. I got a full description of 2 of them. The poor woman who helped me was going to be late for work, but she still stayed until I was off the phone with the cops. Man, she was harsh and blunt with the operator, but I will never forget this woman's utter kindness to me, and her boyfriend's. The cops showed up and contacted my store, and my manager brought out the spare keys for me to drive the car back. After dealing with the cops, I drove back and was greeted by crying and beyond worried coworkers. A lot of them were terrified that I was hurt. It actually meant a lot to me how much they cared. And thankfully I was still fine. I filed the proper paperwork, and the 72 was written off as a loss to the store. I was told by my boss to take the rest of the night off and take care of myself. He actually gave me a hug. And to this day, he was still one of the best bosses I ever had. What I didn't know was that I was in for a very long night. Called my best friend before I left the store and asked where he was. We usually meet up for drinks after work, and he was around the corner at the bar, so I met up with him. His dad was a District 4 cop in the city at the time, the same district this happened in. He told me his dad had given him a heads up, and he had 2 shots waiting for me to calm my nerves. After those shots, we played pool when his dad called his phone and asked if I was with him yet. He then handed me the phone. His dad asked if I would come down to the station. I was honest with him, told him I had those 2 shots and I'd been drinking so I couldn't drive. He ended up sending a squad car to get me since it wasn't that far away. Once we got to the station, I was informed that they already had suspects in custody, and I was needed to ID them. 3 boys and a driver. They'd been caught less than 20 minutes after the robbery, speeding. The bolo had already gone out and they matched the description. They'd used the money to buy weed and gas and then taken off. They had at least 15 stolen cell phones on them, and the order had been placed on a stolen phone. My phone was in the mix of the box. The police told me to grab my phone only, and I did. I unlocked my phone and then told him all the details once again. I also mentioned to him that the guy that was behind me was obviously bullied into this, and to show him some mercy, pointed him out as the one in the white shirt. The police then informed me that he was the one that was talking. The other 3 denied involvement. And that's when I found out about the 4th guy, the driver. He was completely unaware of the robbery and just picking up his friends. He was thankfully never charged. The one behind me and the one who grabbed the pizza were 15 and 16 and got 6 months of house arrest. The only reason the one behind me got off easy, despite having the gun to my back, was because I asked them to go easy on him, and that he seemed like a good kid who didn't want to be there. And he was the only one confessing anything, so. The last kid was 18, the one who put his gun to my temple. He got the book thrown at him. The plea deal he was given gave him 8 years. It's now only been 4. He's getting out early due to overcrowding. Not good behavior, overcrowding. It's this coming February. But I'm ready if he finds me. My wife, my parents, everyone I know knows his face and his name. If he tries anything, we are all ready. But for his sake, let's not meet again. I apologize if this isn't the right sub to post this story, and if people think it's better suited somewhere else, then please let me know. It's taken me years to work up the courage to post this story to strangers because the events that took place all those years ago left me puzzled and frankly disturbed. It's perhaps best if I provide some background and context because it may help strengthen my story, and people will hopefully believe me. I know that a lot of people claim to have a true story about strange encounters in the woods, and I don't want people to accuse me of making all of this up. Because honestly, I swear this really did happen. It's not supernatural, it took place during the daytime, and the quote-unquote monster is very much human. When I was approximately 13 or maybe 14 years old, it would have been 2003 to 2004, I went on a camping trip with my mother and stepfather and 4 of my younger siblings. We're not a very well-off family. In fact, we were actually quite poor. I never went on holidays abroad, and we would never go camping. If we did, it was usually to the same campsite, which felt like miles away, but in reality was just less than 10 minutes from the city where we lived. We had actually been there a few times previously, and knew the campsite as well as the surrounding area fairly well. It felt safe and familiar. On this occasion, everything was going pretty normal. I myself hated camping, but my parents would argue when it came to putting up our tent. It was just so boring being in the woods. I would normally be the one entertaining my siblings. I hated not having electricity and access to proper toilets and showers. It could be quite fun looking back, and I do treasure some of those memories I have with my stepdad, who is unfortunately no longer with us. Usually, we would go on long hikes or bike rides, with my stepdad using maps to chart our way to a small village, promising to get us all ice cream, which was a real treat, which we never really normally had. On this camping trip, we were going to go on a 10-mile bike ride. Both my parents had their own bikes, along with my sister and I. My stepdad's bike had the small trailer where my 3 younger siblings, all under the age of 5, were sat. It was hard work going through these epic long rides, but I rather enjoyed being in the middle of the woods, surrounded by nature. We weren't in the middle of nowhere, but it was remote enough for it to be inaccessible to public transport. Only forest ranger type vehicles could access the roads we were on. It weren't real roads, like paved with tarmac. It was more like dirt roads, which were only suited for bicycles. During all the times we went camping, we never saw any other vehicles go down these roads. On this day, we were cycling down this road when suddenly we hear the sound of a vehicle coming up slowly behind us. My stepdad is in front of us when he tells us to stop and move aside to let the vehicle pass. There's a sense of urgency and confusion in his tone as he's unsure why there's even a vehicle here. The vehicle passes us and we are expecting to see a forest ranger vehicle, like a 4x4 Land Rover type of vehicle. But instead, we see one of those station wagon types of cars. The ones with the long body, large trunk, and the window. In the back of this station wagon, I see several large trash bags. It's a very strange sight. I may only be a teenager, but it's a sight that sets off alarm bells for several reasons. 1. This is not a car that's designed for going off the road. As previously mentioned, we've never encountered any vehicle down this bike path. 2. The person driving is clearly not lost, as they didn't stop to ask for directions or anything. These big black trash bags look very suspicious, and by that point, they're all fully tied up, very tightly. We could all see into the back of the car, and I saw nothing poking out to indicate that it was full of garbage. The driver looked very rough. I don't mean to sound rude, he just looked very mean. I can't recall his features exactly, just that he didn't look like a friendly person that belonged in the countryside. He wore dark clothing. I think he was clean shaven and had short hair. I wish I remembered more about what this man looked like. As if this incident couldn't get any stranger, what took place next has left such an impression on me that I still recall that sense of fear that I felt at the time. My palms are getting sweaty and my heart is racing just riding this post. The car drives on several more feet, and the driver stops. What feels like the longest time in my entire life, and nothing happens. We're just sitting there watching this car. My stepdad has now told us to remain still. He's very serious as he's assessing the situation. Then, the car's reverse lights come on, and it starts backing up to us. My stepdad goes into full panic mode, and he tells us, "Run!" We don't even get back on our bicycles to ride. Instead, we all flee on foot, running with our bicycles through the woods, until we reached a railway bridge, which we had previously passed over. We never looked back. I have no idea if the man got out of the car to go after us or not. I don't know if he just continued driving. I still have no idea who he was or what was in those bags. We never really spoke about what happened that day. I know that it was something serious enough that it scared my stepdad because of his response. And it's left me frightened about who I might encounter in the woods until this very day. I was 18 years old and just graduated high school 3 months prior. I was married. We'd rented a very small one-bedroom house that was across the street from the bank where I worked as a teller. We hadn't lived there very long, maybe a month or so. We were young and barely making ends meet, so there wasn't a lot of decorations or things around the house, etc. I was always a very trusting person. I was raised in the country and in times where you could leave your windows and your doors unlocked. It always taught me to see the good in people. I'd come down with a cold and taken cold medicine one night and went to bed very early. At this point, I'd only been married for less than 6 months, and I remember in my sleep feeling someone messing with me. In my half-asleep cold medicine bogged down head, I started reacting and thinking it was my husband. Then I roused up and opened up my eyes. It was around 2 a.m. I looked over at my husband kind of laughing and said, "What are you doing?" Only he was sound asleep facing the other direction. Puzzled, I looked forward. At the foot of my bed, with the street light shining in my window, crouched a gray-haired man. He was looking straight at me. It was then I noticed this weird smell, like alcohol and food mixed together, and I immediately registered something was very wrong. Out of a natural reaction, I screamed. When I screamed, my husband jumped up facing me. At almost the exact same moment, the man jumped up and ran out of the bedroom door. The bedroom door was located right by the head of the bed, on my husband's side. Since he jumped up looking at me, He did not see the man run out. He asked me what was wrong, but I was so scattered nothing was coming out of my mouth or made any sense whatsoever. He kept saying it's okay, just had a bad dream and everything is just fine. I can't describe the panic I felt inside. I refused to lay back down. I got up from the bed and walked into the next room, which was our living room, and my husband followed me. Once we entered the living room, it was all becoming reality. The front door to the house was propped open with a brick. The rocking chair we had was moved out of the way of the doorway to the bedroom. My assumption was he was making sure he had a clear shot of the house. Laid all over the floor were the contents of my purse. There was a few dollars missing, my social security card, a change purse, and a photo. Seeing how we were young and broke, we didn't have a home phone. Cell phones were not a thing at this time. We were trying to get pants and shoes on to call the cops when we heard a car door shut. I started screaming. Oh my God, he's gonna steal our car! My husband went to the door to see a female officer walking toward our house. I immediately start rambling how there was a man. He was in my house. He messed with me. He touched me. And I needed help. I know I look like a crazy person who was babbling nonsense. The officer calmed me down and asked me to tell her what had happened. So I repeated myself. She asked if I knew what he looked like and if I could identify him. I told her I could. To this day, that man's face and hair haunt my thoughts and dreams. It's permanently in my brain. She then went on to explain that she was making rounds and found a man running across the road suspiciously. She stopped him and was taking him in for public intoxication. When he got into the back seat, he was trying to stuff my change purse inside his pocket. She took it from him and reverse searched my social security number to find that I lived just a road over from where this man was picked up. I call it divine intervention. The man claimed I was a friend of his and he'd just left my house not long ago from hanging out. My house was fingerprinted and pictures taken and diagrams drawn. They tested his hands and fingerprints for my DNA. I had to go to court and testify. I found out I was pregnant just a few weeks later, had constant nightmares and became very jumpy. The stress from everything threatened my baby, so we agreed to accept a plea bargain. Aggravated sexual assault and battery among some other charges for breaking and entering and theft of property. I found out he was living in a camper that was parked in front of the bank where I worked at. That month I was a teller assigned to drive through. I was facing his camper daily. I walked to and from work because it was just across the street and took more effort to drive. Plus, we only had one car. They also found other items from my house inside his camper upon searching it. Confirmed that he'd been in my house before. He had actually saw my husband in the bed next to me. Walked around him to my side of the bed. He was obviously on a mission. I finally got through court, and he was sentenced and I tried to move on. About 4 to 5 years later, I received a phone call from the police department a city over. There's a new law that had been passed. Every prisoner for a sexual-related offense had to submit their DNA. There was a hit. The same man who broke into my home had hit on a series of high-profile rape cases in the next city over. They were brutal, and no one ever saw him. Just one girl saw tattoos on his arms behind her. He would tie them up and use tape on their eyes. Shockingly, we all had similarities. He obviously had a type. The girl that saw the tattoos had given a description, and it was televised on the news. I guess he ran to the next town in hopes of running away from it. At the time they caught him at my house, he had tape and everything on him. It just didn't make sense why at the time. Now all the dots have started to connect. He was a serial rapist. All of the victims were between 17 and 23, and this man was almost 60. Then all those years later, I realized, had I been home alone? Had he broken in during my lunch break when I was alone? It could have been so much worse. I didn't have to deal with some of the horrible things that the other girls did, but it still really messed me up. It caused us to have marital problems because I didn't feel protected. I still have PTSD, but I'm very, very lucky. God was watching out for me, and I'm thankful it's not worse than it was. By far, this was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I'm sorry it was so long. Not something I tell a whole lot of people. I had a friend not believe me one time, saying it sounded just too crazy, until she saw the sentencing on the news. I was used as a witness for the other girl's case, showing the career history of the man and all the similarities. he was sentenced and put away for the rest of his life. Thanks for listening if you stuck around to this point. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, and that notification bell to be notified when future episodes come out. If you have a true scary story of your own, feel free to send it to my email or post it to my subreddit. You can stalk me on Twitter, you can stalk me on Facebook, and you can also stalk me on Instagram. Also, don't forget that I'm doing podcasts now. It's the stories that you've already heard. It's just in long compilation form, usually anywhere from an hour to 2 hours long. I usually do those bi-weekly, so every 2 weeks you'll see those. Amazon, Spotify, what's the other one? iTunes stuff. iTunes. So check that out if you want to listen to it in long compilation form. That option is there too, so just search Booze and Booze in wherever you get podcasts. What's going on, everybody? Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for saying hello. I hope you liked this episode. This was a decent one, I think, for the most part. I hope you're liking the shorts. I hope you're liking the more of the content. I know the shorter ones that I put out aren't quite like this one, or these ones, the scary stories, horror stories told in the rain. This what seems to be a lot more popular than the shorter ones, but I have a lot of fun making the shorter ones, and it's content, you know, so you're still getting content one way or the other. Drop some ideas of drop some ideas of some stories or themes below this if you're still here and still listening, so that I can have an idea of something to put in for next week. I'm gonna immediately start gathering stories to put for another true scary stories and stuff like that, so you can enjoy that if you want to. Yeah. I don't really know what else to say. This is like week 2 of not having a job and just doing content creation. It's really weird. It's still kind of an adjustment. It still feels like almost a nightmare sometimes, but also a blessing, or waking up from a nightmare knowing that I don't have to go back to the post office anymore. So this is rad. I love doing it. I hope you're enjoying it. I'm hoping that my channel can start blowing up or getting bigger at some point in time. That'd be nice. I mean, I enjoy every single one of you and love every single one of you, but yeah, I'm trying to be patient, but it's tough sometimes. Just want to get big. Just want to make it, you know? Don't know if any of you played The Last of Us, the video game, but the show just came out last Sunday on HBO, and it's fucking awesome. If you played the game, definitely watch it. Or if you haven't played the game, still definitely go watch it, because it's awesome. It's awesome? Yeah. it's awesome. Go check it out. I'm tired. I'm gonna go to sleepy night-night. Catch some ZZ Tops. See you in the next one. Cheers.